Welcome to the StoryLens Podcast, where your story is our focus. We explore wealth, legacy, and purpose through a process that starts with deep listening and leads to one-of-a-kind strategies. At StoryOne, we believe the best planning begins with you.
Welcome to the StoryLens Podcast, conducted by StoryOne. Today we have John Christensen, who is the CEO and Senior Wealth Planner of StoryOne, Cameron Bond, who is a Senior Wealth Planner at StoryOne, and myself, I am the COO. We are the partners of StoryOne, and we have some wonderful things we want to talk to you in our first podcast today. So I thought maybe we would just get started. The first thing that we kind of wanted to talk about in the podcast is what is a multifamily office and how does it differ from other wealth management models? John, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think I hate to describe things by what they're not, but I think it makes, at the two ends of the spectrum, there's kind of your retail investment advisory firm that really focuses on helping almost anybody manage their assets, regardless of net worth, complexity, that kind of thing. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have people like the Gates family or, there's a lot of single-family offices here in Kansas City, maybe the Halls, that kind of thing, where they have hired their own professionals to work on their family matters. And then kind of the multifamily office is kind of right in between. And basically our thought was that, there's this vast mid-market that's underserved. And we kind of describe that mid-market as that $20 million to probably $250 to $400 million family. That doesn't make sense for them to have their own family office, but their estate plan, their balance sheet is more complicated than what a normal retail investment advisor can work with or can help on. So.
Yeah, when we worked with families over the years, we have just kind of run into this again and again where, at about $20 million, complexity just kind of blossoms, right? There's just, the estate plan gets more unique, more complex. There's more complex tax considerations. Usually at that point, families get more interested in alternative investments, so they want some private equity exposure, they own some real estate. You just kind of get in that multi-generational wealth type of net worth. And we've just met these families again and again who were at that level, but still operating on a very simplified structure, or things were just a little bit of a mess, right? No one really had their hand on the wheel. Things were unorganized. And so that's really, I think, what compelled us to say, wow, this space is underserved. This space is a place we can add a lot of value. And it's just a place we have a lot of expertise. And we get to kind of, in those environments, we get to really partner with the family and be more involved. And so that's a really rewarding part of the work for us as well.
So you have been partners for a number of years. I've been your partner for a year. In that time frame, what kind of led you to believe that the multifamily office was the path that you wanted to go?
Yeah, I think for me, and John brought me on 10 years ago and really kind of introduced me to this space and this way to work with clients. Something I observed early on in watching John was like, he is just such a fierce advocate for families. And when I saw the way he was working with these families, and kind of leaning in way beyond just, oh yeah, you should consider this or maybe do that, but really caring deeply, like that really kind of met me, like where my heart's at and the way we serve and care for people. So it's not about selling a product. It's not about, a bottom line revenue number. It's like, hey, this is what this family needs. And if it takes us 100 hours to get there, we're doing it. Like that's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that is, I don't know, that just aligns with my worldview. I think the way that we should care for families, the way we should care for people. And so I think and it is unique in the multifamily office space that we are awarded a little more time. Like we are able to spend more time with those families. And so, again, kind of going to John's point about the more of a retail advisor, they might spend 5 to 20 hours with a family in a given year. We're going to spend more like 250 hours with a family in a given year. And that's not always one-on-one with a family, but that's like thinking about them, doing work for them. And so at that level, we just, the heart more, the desires, their mission, vision, values, goals is the language we use. You get to know their kids, and like that just is a much more rewarding experience than just, showing up and solving a quick problem and getting back out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was certainly something that attracted me to be partners with you. John, how would you answer that?
Well, I describe it as we end up in our client's living room, right? So when I graduated law school, I wanted to do estate and tax planning. And, an estate and tax planner for a normal family meets with a family maybe once every 5 years, maybe once every 10 years. And, a CPA meets with the family maybe a couple times a year. And when I figured out kind of the space or the place that a investment advisor can hold in a family's life, it just really appealed to me. Basically, an estate planning attorney might need 50 clients a year. If they're doing big projects, they might need 10 clients a year. We really need 125 clients, period, right? And so with that, we get to know our families in very deep ways. And it's often that, we do spend a lot of time on the front end of relationships, getting to know families. But it also allows us, when we're designing estate plans, when we're helping families think through things, we can kind of just put ourselves in their shoes. And oftentimes that's kind of how I think about things. It's like, if I were making a recommendation to my own family, what would I want here? And so it is like, I think for Cameron, probably for you, like the interesting thing about this profession is for me, it's a profession and a calling, right? So lots of times we end up in very tender places with families. And, it's kind of sacred ground. And, it just allows us, to speak into things that, when you're in law school or when you're studying for your CFP, or it's just, nothing really prepares you to address and talk about some of the things that we address and talk about. But it is a real privilege to be able to help families through, complex family situations, complex business situations. And I kind of at the same time, just like Cameron said, just really advocating for clients, and trying to make sure that, we're helping them be good stewards. We're helping them think about, the next generation or 3 generations from now. So it's just an honor and a privilege to be in that place.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of thinking about this theme of things I'm seeing lately as we work with families kind of in this multifamily office space, is that they're usually surrounded by advisors of some kind, right? There's a CPA already on board. They usually have pretty iffy feelings about that relationship. There's an attorney sometimes too. There's a team, but it's amazing how few people actually really make recommendations. Like they'll give advice, and if they're prompted, they'll say, hey, this is how this works, or, here's a way you can't do it. They never really lean in and take ownership and say, hey, no, actually, we're going to kind of cast a vision for what this could look like, not only as immediate decision, but over a 20-year, 50-year horizon. And it's just incredibly common. And these are all people who are incredibly gifted in their skill set. Like they know law, they know tax, they know things, but they just don't really lean in. And I think part of that's risk aversion. Part of it's maybe they don't really know the family that well. But it's a space that we have kind of just embraced and saying, no, like we are actually going to be on the team. We're going to be a partner. And sometimes we might make a recommendation that's a little bit of a pain point for you, but if we can kind of walk alongside you in it and say, actually, this is the right decision, even if it's not the path of least resistance, that's just such a common theme in the work we're doing. And I think it is a differentiator, and just one, it's rewarding to us. I think it's a better outcome for the family, and it's just a rarity, I think.
Yeah. I always joke that inertia is our biggest competitor. And it is, like, whether we're talking to a family about coming on board, but often it's when we are working with a family and they've done things a certain way for years or for generations, there's times where it makes sense to not do what we have been doing, or it makes sense for a family to not do what they have been doing. So often we're the ones that are, fighting the ocean, jumping in front of the train, throwing a hand grenade in the room, whatever you want to say, to really try to get a change. And some of that is just a change because the plan we have now is a 20-year plan and we need a 50-year plan. Or the plan we have now is a 5-year plan and we need a 100-year plan. So, one of the disciplines that we try to have is, what we talk about is looking at the far horizon, right? Because if you're not looking at the far horizon, you're going to end up somewhere you don't want to be. So, whether it's a scout analogy or a trail analogy, whatever it is, like we try to look 25, 50, 100 years out and figure out where do you want your family to be, and then you kind of back into what are the goals for this year, what are the goals for this month, that kind of thing.
So StoryOne focuses on our clients, on the people, making people impact. StoryOne's mission is heart-led growth, and it's really important to what we do. So we care about everybody who walks in. We have two business lines, right? Wealth management and kind of a multifamily office. This episode is about multifamily offices. When a family walks in who is a potential multifamily office client, what's the approach?
Something that energizes me a lot is solving problems, right? I love to solve problems. So if there's a simple problem in front of me, I'll solve it.
I can validate that.
If there's a complex problem in front of me, I'll solve it. So often when we meet with families for the first time, like we don't know exactly what we're walking into, right? And so there may be a family we meet with that fits better just as a wealth management client, or there's a family we meet with that works better as a family office client. So really kind of the initial steps a lot of times is just getting to know that family or getting to know that person. And, some of that's just the old-fashioned discovering diagnostic where we just literally ask for all your data, all your information. But, kind of the soft side of that is a lot of conversation about who they are or what they want to have happen. We do have this StoryLens process. The analogy that I use is there's times where we arrive on the scene and there's a lot of sheep and there are no pens, right? So then we start figuring out like what pens do we need and what sheep need to be in what pens, right? And then as we go along, as sheep show up, we just put them in the right pen and it's not that big a deal. But oftentimes we're the first people to go like, we need to build some sheep pens here. So
yeah, I mean, we're not unlike a doctor. I mean, yes, people do go do annual checkups, just, and that's a great move. But more often it's like, oh, something's not quite right? Or something, I'm afraid of something. There's a fear that's just kind of festering, like, and I need to get this solved. And so it's oftentimes we intersect families when there is a pain point, something that's not quite right, something that's compelling them to go, oh, this is going to be some work, but I'm going to go ahead and lean in. And so, sometimes things are absolutely on fire and like, it's like, okay, like we just met, but there are issues all over the place. Let's just get right to work. There's a lot to do. But, within that process, we are not just going to ask, those kind of parody questions in the financial advisor world. Like, what are your goals? When do you want to retire? How much money do you want to spend annually? Those are good questions. Those are important. You need to know those things. But I think the questions that compel us more, give us better insight into a family are much deeper and they do take some time to flesh out. Like it's not a 15-minute, oh, you want to be done at 65 and then, live on $500,000 a year. Okay. And this is your balance sheet. It's much more of a, kind of like, what are the challenges that reside within your relationship with your kids right now and how they interact with your wealth? And what do you think that looks like in 20 years if we stay on the same trajectory? Or, if it comes to charitable giving, it's a lot of the families we work with are very charitably inclined and they have giving hearts. But they've kind of reached an inflection point. Their wealth is now compounded to a point where, just the old stroke a couple checks to a couple charities they like is no longer the right strategy. Like there needs to be more governance. And so really leaning into the heart of that conversation of like, what do you want to see happen with these funds over a long period of time? And let's kind of create a vision collectively that really aligns so that we can really steer the ship in that direction.
So what, from a client perspective, which clients or what types of clients would benefit the most from a multifamily office or family office services, or what clients benefit?
Yeah, I think, John threw out that metric a moment ago of that kind of, we do see complexity start to really compound at about 20 million in net worth. And that can be liquid, it can be illiquid. They can own a business that has that value, but and then you do reach a point where, and you could debate what that number is, what that ceiling is. Is it 500 million where you say, okay, a single family office starts to make more sense? There's just, there's enough scale there that's the right path. But really in that range, approximately 20 million to 500 million is probably the bandwidth. And that's where complexity is so robust. And there's so many things that you really do need a team like ours that can sit in kind of all the conversations, right? And have a vision across the board, not just, a singular focus.
Yep. And it is interesting, like when I think of across the families we work with now, I think there's kind of some normal themes or some recurring themes. I think one is the exit planning. We intercept a lot of families when they're thinking about selling their business. The earlier we can intercept those types of families, or the earlier that we can be engaged with those families, the more helpful we can be pre-exit, to help set them up well for post-exit. And when I say that, I mean by saving them a lot of money in tax dollars, right? So for those people getting ready for an exit, the earlier we engage, the more likely we can help them save a lot of money on taxes. When I say a lot of money, I mean millions of dollars potentially on taxes, either from an income tax or an estate tax standpoint, long term. The other thing is, a lot of what we do is we do a lot of charitable design work. So one of the families we work with, the reason we work with them is 5 years ago, they were talking to one of their consultants and said, basically, we want to give our entire balance sheet to charity. And their consultant basically said, you need some planning help. And so this particular family, we get to spend, we've worked with them for about 5 years, and we're helping them design and give away their entire balance sheet to kingdom work, to ministries, it's an amazing opportunity to work with them, but it also creates a lot of work from a standpoint of oftentimes when we're working with a family and they're not exactly clear on their own intention, they'll say something like, oh, my trustee will know what I mean, or my children or grandchildren would know what I would do in that case. Well, actually, we need to put some governance around that. Let's put some documents in place or some language in place so that whoever's making decisions after you actually knows what you're thinking about or what you're passionate about. So it's just, that's another example. The other is we do work with a lot of first generation wealthy. So whether that's a business owner that has sold or younger couples that have inherited their wealth. and it is interesting. I mean, it's really fun. That's a really fun part of our job, and it is a little bit of stewardship, education, hand-holding. A lot of that, when we start working with those types of people, it's to start with just a whiteboard. Mm-hmm. So we get to implement, like, literally, back to the sheep and the pens analogy of, like, if we show up and there are no sheep yet, we can just build the pens, and as sheep show up, we can put them in the right pens, mm-hmm. right? So when we start working with that first generation wealthy, getting organized and doing things the right way to begin with just makes things a lot easier for the duration of their lives, or even to the next generation. So mm-hmm. those are kind of the three buckets, I think, as far as families we work with.
In a simple way, I always kind of view it as, helping families out with giving, living, and growth.
Yeah.
In various capacities. And there's a lot involved in that. And I know with multifamily office, there's this term complexity. It comes up constantly.
Mm, yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about that, what complexities arise, mm-hmm. And how StoryOne helps navigate the complexities with other partners or with families.
Yeah.
Yeah, John likes to say, like, if you've, built a plan for one family office client, you've built a plan for one family office client, right? There's not a lot of opportunity for redundancy because every family is unique. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually exciting for us because, we do like those challenges to John's point about loving to solve problems. Like, there's a lot of unique problems to solve. And, yeah, so the term bespoke is thrown around in our world, but it's true. It's like every problem is unique, but it's rarely black and white. It's rarely just, oh, this is the clear path. This is what we ought to do, or if the path is fairly clear of this is where we want to go, getting there is. And I don't want to be like fear centric in it because it's not the way we think about it. But there is a recognition that, like, there are some landmines here, right? There are some things that if we don't get right, the consequences could be pretty significant, particularly when you run growth projections out over time and you go, wow, when this compounds over 50 years, that's a staggering number. And so, yeah, so complexity is just, it abounds in the work. And, John, maybe you can speak more to it in specifics, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that, again, kind of this idea of, like, who needs a multifamily office, right? There's a lot of times where we, if we start working with an older couple, there's times where we show up and, by the end of the third or fourth meeting, we may understand the balance sheet better than they do, right? Who actually owns this, mm-hmm. This particular asset, this particular entity. But then the other, I think one of the more complex situations for families is, like there's kind of two different buckets or elements of trusts, right? So we talk about it kind of like legacy trusts and then like your trust, or legacy estate and your estate. Mm-hmm. So legacy estate, or legacy trust, those are trusts that maybe great-grandpa, great-grandma, grandma, some great-uncle, somebody set up. So there's times where we work with families where we're working with this trust that's been in place since the 50s, or this trust has been in place since the 70s. And how that trust distributes could have real tax consequences now, mm-hmm. right? And so that's when we talk about complexity, when you start talking about, like, the generation we're working with, their estate plan, that's a certain level of complexity. But then it really compounds when you start talking about legacy trust, these trusts that have been around, sometimes for 70 years. And now we're needing to deal with when those distribute, what happens, mm-hmm. Or what planning opportunities do we have? And it is, so, one of the benefits of a multifamily office is, like, Jones and Smith. Let's just use those as two generic families, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll get into a situation with the Joneses and we'll be working through some really complex planning. And you go, well, hey, that's actually pretty analogous to something that the Smiths are dealing with. So this trick or this tool that we've kind of sharpened on one family, we get to say, hey, I think this actually applies over here as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's the idea of like the multifamily office, like when we start working in complexity and you start getting into minutia, you can really start to potentially benefit multiple families with the same strategy or the same technique. Mm-hmm. It's, yeah. So like, for example, I went to Heckerling. I typically go to Heckerling, which is this tax conference every year. And I try to get, every year there's a handful of nuggets that you get out of that. That's like, as you're sitting there in, 5 days of CLE, something will pop up and you're like, oof, I think we should use that particular thing for the Joneses or the Smiths. And then it is just like, it's fun to be able to apply some of that more cutting edge, really isn't the right term for estate planning, but some of those more advanced techniques that may be edgy or quite frankly may just be currently available because of the tax law. So complexity just, some of it's balance sheet, some of it's estate plan, but when you start layering on multiple generations of estate planning, it gets pretty complex.
And I know, John, you were a football player. As you solve problems, which you do very well, you have to bring in a lot of different partners to help solve those problems. Yeah. And it's important to have the experience to know who to talk to, whether it's we need to bring in a CPA or we need to bring in some charitable foundation into whatever the problem or the challenge that is to solve. You may talk a little bit about that, and Cameron, you as well, about managing just the partner complexity to solve problems.
Yeah. And it is interesting, back to one of Cameron's earlier points, where there's oftentimes where, like, we'll be in a meeting and the estate planning attorney will be there, or the tax attorney, and the CPA and the client, and we'll be in the room, and the CPA or the tax attorney or the estate planning attorney will say something, and they'll, like, mean it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, hey, we shouldn't do it this way. But the client doesn't really hear it that way, right? Mm-hmm. They don't really hear that as a recommendation, but it often sets off an antenna. Our antenna go up and go, huh. Like, so we start to kind of try to connect the dots. And then a lot of times we backfill with that family and be like, when the CPA said X, Y, Z, this is actually what they were talking about. So we need to go ahead and apply that before the end of the year when we're making this charitable gift. So we're, what I like to say is, like, I know a lot about a lot of things. I'm not really an expert in anything. Like, I really describe myself as a professional issue spotter, right? So in tax situation, income tax situation, estate tax situations, like, really, I try to get to like 85% proficiency and be like, I know there's an issue right here. And then you go to the CPA and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Help me kind of flush this out. Or with the estate tax situation, same kind of thing, where it is like we rely on those partners to help us kind of get, go from 85 to full proficiency. And then internally we have some great people on staff that are, there's some things that I do really well and there's some things that I don't do very well. So having those people on staff that, like Maddie helps a lot on family office clients, and, her skill set is just spectacular from a standpoint of complementing what I'm weak at, but also what Cameron's weak at. And so it is a thing where a lot of times it is, we're relying on the team. The other thing that's interesting that I've noticed a lot in working with higher net worth families, in particular business owners, is there's lots of times where a business owner, the CPA for the business has been the CPA for the family for years, sometimes decades, right? And oftentimes what's good for the business is also good for the family. But then there's often, it reaches a point where the family needs to do their own tax planning separate and apart from the business. And often that's a very difficult, bridge when you start talking about that from a standpoint of actually what the team needs is we need a second CPA, or, hey, Kenny, your family actually needs a CPA.
Mm-hmm.
Your business can continue to use the business CPA, but you need a CPA that's helping you and your family thinking about how to solve your particular problem. So there's times where we're adding members to the team where the family might be scratching their head a little bit, but it is because we're just trying to advocate for the family and make sure that the right people are there to help.
Mm-hmm.
As we kind of land our first podcast episode, the complexity is in the tactical side, but it's also in family dynamics and how we navigate that. Cameron, you want to maybe talk a little bit about the dynamics of helping navigate family dynamics and complexity there?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we talk about it as the soft side, of the work, if the numbers represent, or the law represents the hard side. That, I think, at the end of the day, what drives a family, what drives a plan is not, am I getting 15% return or 12% return? Or, am I paying this much tax or that much tax? Those are super important and they are drivers, but ultimately it's about like, am I caring for my family? Am I caring for my kids, future generations? Am I being charitable? Am I shepherding these things well? And that, that is much more of a heart level conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And, to John's point about we end up in the living room, relationships are messy. Life is messy. And, wealth has a tendency to compound those problems, or it's can be fuel on a fire, right? And so to understand the family dynamic, the culture of the family, and we don't get it perfect, but we want to spend a lot of time leaning into that part of the conversation and really understanding what is the dynamic between father and son, or father and daughter, whatever it is. Because ultimately, if we save some money on taxes, but ultimately somebody else, someone in the family then ends up with a lot of wealth and it drives them into a terrible situation, then that is not a positive outcome. And so really understanding the culture of the family, understanding their mission, vision, values, goals. And, it's just, one, it's really rewarding work. But it is difficult to navigate, and it is something that brings us a lot of joy when we can meet a family in that space.
Well, it is it's often, often it's the driver for somebody making a decision. Like, hey, our estate plan's been around for a long time, but we want to change it because of X, Y, Z. But then, the majority of our clients are faith-based, right? They have some relationship with Jesus. There's something there that's super important to them. And almost, the majority of them would rather have a family that's, at peace, connected, and relational. And if it were choosing, hey, we're going to transfer a lot of wealth to future generations, or we're going to have a family that's united and living well, most of them would pick, hey, we want a family that's united, living well. So part of what we're trying to do, quite frankly, in those situations on the family dynamic side is how do we have both, right? Because often these families that have accumulated a lot of wealth need to decide, there's kind of the two buckets. One is, does it go to charity? Well, there's kind of three buckets. Does it go to the government via taxes? Does it go to charity, or does it go to family, right? And so the tax bucket, most people agree that we don't want to put anything in that bucket if we can avoid it, right? So then it really boils down to charity or family. And, a lot of the families we work with, they would say, if this wealth is going to ruin my family, I'd rather have it all go to charity. And so what we're trying to do is create governance and understanding and a culture within the family where the wealth doesn't ruin the next generation. So it's a very, again, it's just one of those, it's a little bit like sacred ground. And there's not necessarily I think it's a little bit more of an art than a science. Some of it is the calculations on tax and charity, and that's definitely more of a science. But there is an art to helping a family think through, as a culture within our family, what is this wealth going to mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we covered a lot in this first episode. around multifamily office kind of topics, complexity. Our mission is heart-led growth. So it starts with the family, understanding who they are, and gets down into solving problems and the tactical side of it. And it's really about the heart of what their needs are, and for the firm to help navigate those.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a pleasure to be with you guys. I'm so grateful and feel so blessed to be a partner with you in StoryOne and helping with this StoryLens podcast. So thanks, John. Thanks, Cameron. Thank you to everybody who watched the StoryLens podcast. We're grateful you take this inaugural journey with us. Please subscribe to our podcast, The StoryLens, on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We have some great content that's coming up in the next episodes. Thank you.
Yeah. And Kenny, just shout out to you. Glad you're on the team. Glad you're with us as we pass our 1-year anniversary.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. It's been a fun ride.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you for joining us on the StoryLens podcast. If you're navigating complex financial decisions, we're here to help. We know your story is anything but ordinary, and that's why we start there, because the right solutions are as unique as you are.
StoryOne Family Office, LLC, or StoryOne, is a registered investment advisor, RIA, registered with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Registration as an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and the content of this communication has not been approved or verified by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission or by any state securities authority. StoryOne renders individualized investment advice to persons in a particular state only after complying with the state's regulatory requirements or pursuant to an applicable state exemption or exclusion. All investments carry risk, and no investment strategy can guarantee a profit or protect from loss of capital. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor shall this be construed as advice for the financial needs of any individual. StoryOne is not permitted to offer, and no statements made during this podcast should constitute legal or tax advice. The information contained herein has been compiled by independent third parties, have been obtained from sources who are believed to be reliable. However, accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by StoryOne.